This is the meeting of the Audit Committee, and our first item will be to elect a chair until hopefully the vice chair can come into the meeting. I'm just having a few technical problems. So do I have any nominations for chairperson?
Bill, do you would you be prepared to do it, or I'd be prepared to do it if you want, whatever.
I'll start the meeting off if you like. I've got no problem with that if you wish that to be the way. Everybody's happy with that.
Do you have any objections?
I propose Bill Soames.
Okay, do we have a seconder?
Yes, I'll second that.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Bill, if you'd like to take over the meeting, please.
Okay, thank you very much. First of all, could I ask Madeline, do we have any apologies?
Yes, Councillor G.
Thank you very much. Are there any other apologies that perhaps Madeline hasn't been notified of? No. Okay, so we go on to item 67, which is the minutes of the previous meeting, which was held on the 5th of February 2020. Are there any amendments that need to be put forward on that, or can they be agreed as a true record of that meeting?
Agreed.
Everybody agreed on that? Everybody happy? I'll take that as a yes. Thank you very much. Do we have any declarations of interest?
Yes. Sorry, I'm struggling with my webcam. It's Daniel. I'd like to declare a personal interest in the audit plan for this coming set of accounts. So I'm a director in Woking Housing Limited and Berrybrook Homes Limited.
Thank you very much. That's been noted. Madeline's noted that, I take it. Thank you. Item 69, public question time. Are there any public questions?
No.
None at all. Okay, we go on to item 70, member question times. Are there any? None at all. Thank you very much. Item 71, complaints and compliments. Are there any, the officers have any information? I think Dancy, Liz and Jackie are to introduce the report.
Lovely, thank you very much. Myself and colleagues will be taking you through the findings of two reports this evening. One is the annual corporate complaints report 2019-20, and the other one is the complaints benchmarking report as requested at a previous audit committee. Before we do that, would it be useful for us to do some brief introductions, just so you know who's here? Would that be helpful?
Oh, sorry, cut myself off. Yes, sorry about that. Perhaps we should go round. Is Madeline going to do that in an alphabetical form, or would you like me to go through? I can introduce members of the committee. If you give me just one moment. Right, first of all, sorry, yes.
It's okay. I was going to do some quick introductions from our side, just so everyone knows who we are.
Okay, yeah, that's fine. Yeah, thank you.
So I'm Jacqueline Whitney. I'm the lead manager for customer delivery. My service coordinates the corporate complaints. It sits within my service area, including the link with the Ombudsman. So when they're working on cases we're working in, obviously they contact us and we work with services to provide them with the information.
My name's Michael Bateman. I work as a customer delivery officer. I'm here today to assist with responding to any queries that may arise and also to capture any learning for our future reporting to the committee.
Hello, my name is Denise Penny. I am the Complaints Coordinator Officer at the Council. I also act as the link officer between the Ombudsman and the Council.
Good evening, my name is Liz McCauley and I'm the Children's Services Representative covering the children's statutory complaints process tonight.
So now we'll just hand back over to Dan, who's going to take you through the annual report. That's okay.
Hello everyone, good evening. I'm planning to share my screen with you so that you'll have the actual report in front of you, so you can have an idea of what I'm referring to. Not that one. Sorry, not that one. Sorry about this. Can everyone see that?
Not at the moment.
Not yet, Dan.
Can't see anything.
Oh, that's strange.
You okay, Dan, or shall I try sharing mine, Dan?
Could you do yours, please, Jackie?
Yeah,
I'm having
no
a bit of an issue. Thank you.
Is this the same report as in the agenda?
It is, yes. Hopefully everybody can see that now.
Yeah, that's coming through now. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Jackie. So, in summary, the WeCan report, there has been a slight increase in the number of complaints received as a whole at both stage 1 and stage 2 of the corporate complaints process, when compared with the previous 2 financial years. There has also been an increase in the number of complaints investigated by the Ombudsman. However, the majority of these cases were not upheld by the Ombudsman and is below the national average for local authorities of our type. This is found on page 26 of the pack that was sent on you. The departments receiving the highest number of complaints, again, consistent with previous years, have been for housing and planning services. Predominantly, the complaints relate to high volume concerns, such as repairs at tenanted properties, for instance, delays and the adequacy of repairs, and decisions made in relation to planning applications. We go on to page 27. We have some key standout learnings. So the key standout learnings for last year have resulted in some real tangible changes within department processes. For example, learnings have been found in school admissions, who now have a more comprehensive understanding of the national guidelines in deciding out-of-year requests from parents. The home to school transport team now signpost more clearly the options available to appellants prior to a complaint being lodged with the Ombudsman. And building control solutions have implemented changes to better track invoice payments. At the end of the report, we have seen, and can be found on page 30, we have examples of the types of compliments received by the council. These are wide-ranging and touch upon many services. It should be also noted that the resident population have been clear in their appreciation of the council's efforts to maintain services during the height of the pandemic lockdown. Okay, so that's the end of the summary. I'll be handing back over to Liz. Jackie, if you could scroll to page 22, please.
Yeah, no problem.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So this slide just gives a summary of the number of complaints managed within the statutory complaints process. And this covers complaints made by or on behalf of children who use this children's social care services. And the headline overall for children's social care complaints is that during 2019-20, there's been both a decrease in the number of contacts to the complaint service, which has reduced from 63 last year to 55 this year. and a reduction in the number of complaints which progressed to stage 1, which is 35 compared to 48 last year. And there's also been a reduction in the number of complaints that progressed to stage 2, 2 compared to 4 last year. So we feel that that's an improved position on last year. In terms of the other details on the slide, so I'm trying to move my own mouse at the same time. You'll see at the top of the slide that there was 35 stage 1 complaints, 2 stage 2 complaints, and as I've said, no complaints that have progressed beyond stage 2. So we had no stage 3 panels this year. In the children's complaints process, there is the option after stage 2 to go to a stage 3 panel. So we're pleased that none of them have progressed beyond stage 2. The chart in the middle shows that the complaints are spread across the various children's social work teams, but the highest proportion relate to the front door children's duty team. And at the bottom of the slide, you'll see that 91% of stage 1 responses were completed within the 20-day maximum deadline. The number of out-of-scope complaints has actually increased this year from 6 to 18, which is quite a significant increase. And we believe that this relates to complaints made about cases which are in court proceedings, which therefore aren't usually progressed, but matters are taken up within those proceedings instead. And also that we have received more complaints from other adults within extended families who are not parents or carers, and therefore also out of scope of the complaints process, as they don't have sufficient relationship with the child to progress the complaint. At the bottom of the page, it also highlights the fact that there's been an increase in the number of compliments for children's social care services this year, with 58 compliments. In relation to the details of complaints, obviously they are, quite small numbers, so they're quite specific to families, so we can't go into those details. But we can say that the highest proportion of complaints come from parents or carers of children subject to child protection inquiries or child protection plans at the time when the complaint is made. And given that the front door duty team deal with the majority of that work, that perhaps correlates with the higher number of complaints. We're also aware that this work can be very challenging, and that for many families they may perceive these assessments and inquiries as an intrusion into family life, which may also be an impact on the complaints. So that's the main summary for us. I think we feel that from the analysis of the number of complaints this year, that some increased training for social work managers has helped them to resolve matters at an early stage and perhaps prevent the number of complaints becoming formal complaints. And also the timeliness of responses and work done by the complaints manager and other managers to mediate with families has also helped to prevent the escalation of complaints. So I think that's all I was going to say on this slide. Shall I hand back to Dan?
Thank you, Liz. Jackie, did you want to go into the working group and the upgrade recently?
Yes, absolutely. So let me just get to the right slide. Since we last met Audit Committee, we've been busy updating our complaints management system. The system is called Respond. It went live in April this year. And what it means is that we will have an enhanced reporting function, and it will enable us really to capture the learning and the insight from each of the complaints that we receive across the council. In line with that, now we have a much more effective complaints capturing system in terms of information. We are working on creating a working group, a complaints working group. The aim really of complaints working group is to improve the sharing of learning, identify any highlight any trends, and to take action to really improve the way that we work, with the ultimate goal of leading to better outcomes for our residents. The aim is that we will have representatives from across the council in the working group. We can sit down and share learning and, you know, listen to what our residents are saying.
We
that was
seem to have
to report in terms of the findings of the report. Does anyone on the committee have any questions for us at all?
Thank you very much. Thank you for the report. Can I just say that what I would like to do is to go round each member in alphabetical order, ask if they have any comments or questions to make. And if they do so, could they just refer to the page or the section of which they're asking the question? So if I could start with asking Rachel Burgess, do you have any questions?
I do, yes. I've got 3 fairly brief points, if that's okay. First of all, it's really good to see the compliments. You know, we all know how hard the officers have been working during recent weeks, so it's really good to see that. My first question was on page 22. You mentioned the out of scope complaints, and that's approximately half of those complaints were out of scope, which seems like quite a lot. I know you said it had increased slightly, but who designates those complaints as out of scope, and what then happens to them? So if it's because of court proceedings or whatever, what actually happens to that complaint?
Yeah, I'm happy to answer that. It's a good question, because I think the complaints manager is the person who does do that. They have to evaluate all of the kind of contacts that are made to the complaint service. Some of them are out of scope for different reasons, but we go back to the government guidance, which helps us to determine which adults can make complaints on behalf of children or about children. So that's why it has to be a parent or a carer of someone with sufficient interest. So we don't know. The only thing that we are wondering about is that there may be more adults who are within the extended family who are making complaints, because we operate a social work model which very much involves the network of the family to be involved with the planning on the case. So, for instance, you could have an aunt or a grandparent who's perhaps, you know, not directly caring for the child who might make that complaint, but it wouldn't be appropriate for them to have the details of the case. It would only be appropriate for the parents to have that make that complaint. So that's the kind of example that we would be looking at. In terms of court proceedings, if someone has an issue or a complaint that they're particularly worried about, the complaints manager may deem it out of scope, but they still have to signpost the person to how it might be resolved within the other process. So, for instance, if there was a court proceedings going on, they may ask for the social worker and the person to go back to their own solicitor as well, and to take the matter through their own legal representative. So that's another kind of example of how it would still be dealt with, but not be counted as a complaint. Okay, thanks very much. My second point was relating to page 25 and the comments about the complaints at stage 1 being a small increase. I mean, looking at the graph on page 25, I know the numbers overall are fairly small. I do understand that. But actually, it's a fairly big increase, really. It's sort of about 20%, it looks like, from that graph. So it's perhaps a little bit misleading. Though I do understand that overall the numbers are quite low. And then lastly, page 26, you mentioned well, just looking at the table, sorry, on page 26. So we've got children's services. Half of the children's services ombudsman complaints were upheld. So it's an outlier. I know you've already discussed it to some extent. But what happens when can you say a bit more about what happens when a complaint is upheld to improve processes and practices in the future? The person speaking actually cut out a little bit when they were talking about that. So could you just say a bit more about how you make sure that we do learn when there are, complaints like that are upheld?
Dan, would you like to take that question?
Yeah, sure. So where an investigation is conducted by the Ombudsman and they uphold the complainant's complaint, they usually come to a final decision with recommended actions. Those recommended actions are taken to the relevant department. The department will consider them. They're given a period of usually 2 weeks to consider and make any comments to the draft decision. And if they do not come back with any comments to make apart from agreeing to that decision, then the Ombudsman will issue a final decision. There's usually a time period given for the recommended actions to be completed from the issue of that final decision. It is up to me in that instance to make sure that the department is aware of the recommended actions, that they follow up on completing those recommended actions, and that evidence is provided to the Ombudsman to show those recommended actions and any learnings have been fulfilled. Usually the Ombudsman, if there's any policy suggestions in terms of process changes required, the Ombudsman will give a more extensive time period for that to occur. That's usually up to 3 months sometimes, and they will follow us up. They will chase us up on making sure that there's evidence to provide that we have fulfilled those suggestions and recommended actions.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Rachel. Could I ask Maria G, please? Do you have any questions?
Maria's not here.
Oh, she isn't. Sorry. Right. Okay. Angus Ross, do you have any points you wish to raise? Any questions?
Thank you, Chairman. No, I'm impressed with a very full report, and yes, there are the slight numbers, but this will always happen year on year and with changes. Just one small question. Page 28, you mentioned about the introduction of this new report to respond, and it started in April. Perhaps an unfortunate timing. How has the lockdown affected this operating, if at all?
It hasn't actually. I'll answer that. It's Jackie.
Yeah, sure.
Oh, okay, Dan, carry on.
No, I was going to agree with you. I don't think it has disrupted the recording of the information into this new respond system. Sorry, I just realised I've got to reconnect very soon, otherwise I'm going to lose my VPN connection. So I'll let Jackie take over.
It hasn't impacted negatively, certainly on the service that we've delivered there. When we set out, we were already engaging with the organisation, the supplier who was doing this work for us. So we were already halfway through kind of the development work. So we were able to go live with the system remotely because it's all held in the cloud, and the information is all electronic. It really kind of fitted in actually with the circumstances that we found ourselves in, obviously working remotely. So actually it was an added bonus for us at that time.
Delighted to hear it. Thank you.
Thank you, Angus. Daniel Sargent, do you have any questions?
Yes, just observations from my side, actually. So first of all, I think it's the third year I've been part of the Audit Committee and receiving this report. I think it's got better each time, actually. So I'd just like to say thank you for the team for updating it based on comments we've had in previous years and for making it into a very usable format. So thank you for that. I think on the overall numbers, I think something that might be interesting to look into is how that increase corresponds with the increase in the population in the borough over the time, whether it's an increase per capita in terms of complaints or whether it's just going upwards in line with population. That might be an interesting thing to look into. And what else do I have? So, and yeah, when you're comparing between the different boroughs, and there's some quite different rates of complaints, it might be worth looking into whether complaints are recorded in exactly the same way. I know lots of residents go through the website. Is that the same as elsewhere? Is it more or less accessible to make a complaint in Wokingham than it is in other boroughs? And then just finally, I noticed on page 39, some of the percentages looks a little bit odd to me. I don't know whether that's just my reading of it and not understanding what we're trying to get at there, but it looks to me like they didn't add up properly. So maybe just check that one or let me know if I'm wrong.
Sorry, Daniel, what page was that? Page
39.
39. That's
Yeah.
in the benchmarking report. Okay.
Yeah, I think it was the age demographics piece.
Okay. Yes. Oh, sorry. Going backwards and forwards.
Yeah, so I think you're just coming to it now. I think the way I read it was to add up the percentages, so the Woking Borough percentage is 25.7, 21.9, and so on.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. I found it. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Daniel. Imogen Shepherd-Dubay, do you have any questions?
My questions have been answered already, so I think I'm just going to leave it there. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And unfortunately, being last in the alphabetical list, that's me. And I think all the questions have been asked. So can I say thank you very much for a very comprehensive and very easily understandable report. So thank you very much for that. We move on to item 72, Woking Borough Council Annual Audit Letter of the Year, ended 31st of March 2019. Could I ask Helen and Justin from Ernst & Young to introduce the report?
Thank you, Chairman. First of all, can I introduce Justine, who I'm hoping is going to come onto the camera. Justine's taken over as audit manager from Malcolm Haynes because we've just had a swap of managers around. So Justine's got a lot of experience working in public sector audit, and hopefully we'll have a smooth audit going forward. In terms of the annual audit letter, the purpose of it is to summarise the work that's been completed or was completed on the 2018-19 audit. It confirms that we issued an unqualified audit opinion and value for money conclusion, and also issued the audit certificate to close the audit on the 13th of March. Obviously, that was a delay, as I'm sure the committee will recall. That was largely caused by the pension fund auditor not providing their assurances to us until late January. And in addition, they didn't complete all of the work that we had requested. And then separately from that, we also needed to update our group audit procedures. So we completed the work on the 13th of March, updated the audit results report. The other element that I just wanted to pick up in terms of an introduction is probably something that members may want to question on page 70, which is around the fees for 2018-19. And you'll note that we have agreed with officers an additional fee of £16,600. That now sits with public sector audit appointments for approval. That's part of the process. So the first stage is to agree it with officers, and the second is that PSAA review it and test it out. In general, I would say PSAA provide a tougher challenge in terms of them wanting detail. The reasons for that were largely in relation to the work we did around the value for money risk, the pension fund disclosures themselves. We involved a PFI specialist for their review, and there were some delays and sort of challenges caused by the sort of differences, number of differences between the initial financial statements and the final one, and that's kind of all that's set out within the annual audit letter. Probably all I wanted to say in terms of an introduction, Chairman. Happy to take questions or comments from the committee.
Thank you very much. Okay, so do we have any questions? And first of all, I will ask Imogen, do you have any questions you would like to put forward?
I don't have any questions I'd like to put forward on this one. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's go back to Daniel. Daniel, do you have any questions or comments?
No, thank you.
No? Okay, thank you. Angus, any questions?
No, thank you, Chairman. Here we are at last.
Right. Okay, where are we? Maria G. She's not here. Rachel.
Yes, just a couple of points. I know we've seen all of this before, but just a couple of updates that I wanted. So on page 61 of the pack, so that's page 19 of the document, there's comments in there about the presentation of the information in the MTFP being difficult to follow and, resulting in a lack of clarity. And also that there's comments about the capacity in the finance team being a concern. And I just would like an update from officers on those 2 points. And in terms of the capacity of the finance team, obviously, potentially that's got quite a big impact on the integrity of data, the overall financial control environment. So I just would like a quick update on those 2 points from officers, please.
Can Bob start first, and then I'll follow on from Bob.
Yes, good evening. In terms of the capacity of the finance team, yes, it was observed that the finance team was potentially under-resourced at one point. Since that came through, there's been huge steps going forward in changing the capacity of the team, both in the way we work, the workloads, and actually the numbers of the team in there. And I would say at this stage, the finance team is probably resourced as it needs to be. It's very important to notice on these things that following the transformation programme, finance is not resourced for the peaks, it's resourced more for the troughs. And I'm required to flex my team as I can to cover off the workloads going forward. So it may appear that sometimes the team is not as large as it could be, but it's probably over the whole 12-month period, the right size team, allowing me to flex where I need to.
Okay, yes. Can I follow on from Bob? It's Graham Ebers here.
Thank you very much. Carry on, Graham.
Yes, okay. Yeah, I would echo Bob's comments with regard to capacity. I think the 21st Century Council programme certainly took quite a lot of capacity out of the team, and it took a little while before the ideology of the model fully embedded. What I would say is we have over the past year put quite a bit of capacity back in to support particularly critical areas such as adult social care and children's services. So we've been very responsive and proactive in addressing where we see there are potential financial management shortfalls and putting more robust measures in place. So, I think, as Bob says, we don't ever really want to resource at a complete peak periods. We need to flex up and flex down accordingly. With regard to the presentation of the accounts, the MTFP, I must admit I struggled with this. Obviously, the auditors have their opinion and others will have different opinions. What I will say is previous auditors have commended our presentation of accounts, our MTFP, the amount of information provided, the graphical formation, trend analysis, comparison, benchmarking, and the holistic nature of it, including unit costing and a P&L format for private sector readers to better understand. And those measures have been commended significantly by previous auditors. I think possibly a lesson I guess we can all learn is the more one puts into a report for completeness and meeting the reader's requests for improvement, enhancement, further information, that there's always a danger of someone being able to pick up a huge tome of paper and navigating their way. But we will, of course, seek to make financial management reports and the presentation of them as user-friendly as possible. So we take those comments on board as well.
Okay, thank you both.
Thank you very much. Okay. Can I first of all say that in my haste to get through, I have omitted to ask for a vote on the items already dealt with, item 71, complaints and compliments. Can I have a vote by each one in alphabetical order that they are happy to note the report? So first of all, let's go through in an alphabetical form. Hold on, where am I? So can I ask Rachel Burgess, are you happy to accept that report?
Yes, yeah.
Thank you very much. Angus?
Okay.
Angus Ross? Yeah. Okay, Daniel Sard? Daniel Sargent,
Yes, thank you.
Imogen Shepherd-Dubay.
Yes, and can I ask people to mute when they're not speaking, please?
Yep, would you do that, please? Thank you very much. And finally, me, yes, I'm happy to receive it. And also now item 72, the annual audit letter ended the 31st of March. Again, can I ask in order again, where are we? Sorry, give me a moment. Yeah, right, could I ask Rachel, are you happy to accept that one? Yep. Sorry, Angus.
Agreed.
Yeah, Daniel.
Agreed.
Imogen.
Yes.
And myself, yes. Thank you very much. Okay, I think we're up to date now, are we? I think we are. Okay, let's move on in the order. 1 second. On my pages again. Okay, let's go on. Okay, we come to item 73, the audit planning report year ended 2020, 31st of March. Again, I'll ask Helen and Justine to introduce the report, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I was about to say it almost brings us up to date, but of course we're in 2021. So, but it brings us up to the current year of audit, which is the year ending 31st of March 2020. And it sets out our initial view on risks. We have reflected on the impact of COVID-19 up to a point in the audit planning report, but I think it's fair to reflect to the committee that we will revisit it more fully when we have the draft financial statements. It is unlikely, I think, that COVID-19 will have a very, very significant effect on the financial statements for the 19-20 year, because obviously it was, the impact of that was towards the end of the year rather than for 2021, when it's going to be much more significant. However, there are elements that we will need to consider, and if it changes our assessment of risks, then we will discuss that initially with officers and then provide a revised risk assessment to the committee in advance of the meeting where we present the results. There are 3 areas where we have increased our risk focus. So I'm focusing, sorry, I struggle to flip between the papers and the screen, but I'm focusing on the overview, which is on pages 77 and 78 of the report. So we've increased, getting a bit of feedback, I'm afraid. I don't know. My couch. There are 3 areas where we've increased our focus and our risk assessments. That's in the areas that you might anticipate because of COVID-19. Firstly, the valuation of land and buildings, either within property, plant and equipment and investment properties. Those properties that are valued at fair value are the more likely ones to have had some form of impact towards at the back end of the year, the valuation being at the 31st of March. We've also increased our risk in the area of the pension fund disclosures under IAS 19. Again, in general, how that works is evaluation is carried out towards, say, 31st of December 19 and then rolled forward. I think that would not be an appropriate way of looking at that. So we'll be looking at what the valuations are at the 31st of March. I'm also reflecting within that the challenges we had last year with the Berkshire Pension Fund auditor, and just for the committee's benefit, we've had an initial discussion with Deloitte, who are the auditors for the pension fund. We actually have a further conversation with them on Friday to get a clearer understanding of their timetable and the risks that they are including within their planning. And then the final area which we've increased our focus on is around going concern. Now, that's not because we in any way think that the council would not be considered a going concern. And indeed, I know SIPFA has issued their own guidance. But going concern is an area of focus for the regulator of auditors, effectively. And there is a new auditing standard, which, whilst it doesn't impact directly the financial year ending 31st of March, we are, as a firm, taking a slightly hybrid approach to going concern. So we're taking some of the factors that would be considered under the new standard into account this year. And also, again, I'm sure that all members are aware of the amount of noise and the amount of press coverage around the challenges of COVID-19 and the impact that's having on council finances. Now, we know from talking to your officers that that's not necessarily the most significant risk, but clearly it's something that is going to be on their minds as well. Other areas that I wanted to point out, and before I ask Justine to talk a little bit about the value for money risk that we've identified, materiality is set on the same basis as before. We will reassess it when we get the draft financial statements. We've set out more clearly in our report, in our audit plan, how we have scoped the group audit work and the work that we will do in response to that. And on page 102 of the report, you'll see that the deadlines and the timescale for the audit is somewhat different. I'm sure you may already be aware, and officers will want to comment, but the deadlines for this year have been moved back in recognition of the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic and the sort of amount, the workload that is on officers currently in terms of just delivering services. So the 31st of May deadline for delivering the draft accounts is now the 31st of August, apologies. And the deadline for, well, the deadline that's not really a deadline for delivering local government, for us to deliver our audit report, has moved from the 31st of July to the 30th of November. In terms of our current plans, and I'm hoping Bob will correct me if I get this wrong, we're expecting the draft financial statements to be prepared for the end of June, and our audit is going to be starting in mid-July with the intention of reporting to committee in September. Justine, can I hand over to you just to talk about the value for money risk a moment, please?
Yes, absolutely, Helen. Good evening. So on page 90 of the pack, well, actually, if I take you back to page 89, you can see the introduction to the value for money work that we carry out. And actually, at the bottom of page 89, it says that we've found and identified 2 significant risks relevant to our value for money conclusion. One is the commercialisation and purchase of investment properties, and the second one is the effectiveness of the governance and risk management framework. Now, when we say these are risks to our value for money conclusion, we're not saying that these are business risks for the council, although they can be. What our value for money work is designed to do is actually look at your arrangements for mitigating risks. So, for example, with the commercialisation and the purchase of investment properties, you've got some plans to develop some £85 million worth of commercial and investment opportunities. Now, this is a relatively new area for the council. I mean, you're doing it to generate more income, like a lot of other councils. So it's a risk for us, an audit risk for us, in that we need assurance that you have actually put proper arrangements in place in terms of due diligence, financial management, tax advice, legal advice, just to make sure that there's proper processes and arrangements in place for the purchase of these investment properties. So on the right-hand side of this page, of page 90 of your pack, it actually describes some of the detailed work that we'll be doing to actually gain that assurance that you've put the proper processes in place as at the end of March this year. On the second value for money risk on page 91 of your pack, this is looking at the effectiveness of the council's governance and risk management framework. Now, you have a local code of corporate governance, which actually sets out how your governance and risk management framework is designed. So what our review is intending to do is actually look at how that framework is operating in practice. And having had an initial look back, and as part of our planning for this work, we have noticed some areas where governance procedures could be more effective For example, the risk management strategy and guidance hasn't been updated since 2004. So what we're hoping to do is highlight areas of better practice and where improvements could be made. Thank you, Helen.
Thanks, Justine. I think the final point that perhaps to sort of head off is not quite the word I should use probably, but on pages 109 and 110 of the pack, that sets out the appendix on fees. What I really wanted to just mention to the committee this evening is the wider context of the public sector audit market at the moment, and a number of discussions that have been going on between different stakeholders that have views on or an influence over public sector audit, set within the context of the wider audit market and the review by various bodies of the effectiveness of audit and what needs to change. And I'm sure members will be familiar with that from some of the press reporting. For public sector audit specifically, there are some particular challenges, one of which is that there's no single organisation any longer that oversees the audit market, both in terms of fees, quality, or sort of the way in which the work that we do. There are a number of different players within that market. Public sector audit appointments is the body that appoints auditors, and as our contract as an audit firm is with PSAA rather than with individual councils. The way in which the contract was set up were that firms were asked to make bids for the work in 2016-17 for work that started in 2018-19 and for a 5-year period from that point. In that period, the scrutiny from the regulator of, the Financial Reporting Council, who is the regulator for auditors, has increased, and the work that auditors are required to do has significantly changed as well. So there's been a slight dichotomy in between sort of 16-17 when the fees firms put their bids in and where we are now. In 2020-21, or for this current year, when PSAA went through their consultation process for fees, the outcome was that they left scale fees at the same level, but they acknowledged that fees were not necessarily any longer representative of the risks that were faced for individual councils, and that they weren't in a position to be able to make a decision on a council by council basis as to what the fee should be. So there's been quite a dialogue more recently between audit firms, PSAA as the appointing body, and individual councils about what fees might look like. And to a certain extent, we've tried to reflect that in the appendices that you have within the report. What I would say for Wokingham is that we are continuing to talk with Bob and with Graham in terms of what the fee ought to look like. But I would say that your officers rightly will challenge us on where we are saying that additional fees are required. And so we haven't necessarily specified those fees for what we think they might look like for 2019-20, largely because we don't know until we have the financial statements, and officers won't know either, to what extent we may need to carry out additional work because of changes in valuations, for example, at the end of the year. And so if there are changes, then we will bring that back to this committee. Just thought it would be better to say that now rather than to wait for, I'm sure, the question that it would rightly be asked from us. I think, Chairman, that's all I really wanted to say in terms of an introduction. I don't know if either Bob or Graham would want to comment, but other than that, I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you very much for that. Bob or Graham, are there any comments that you wish to make before we ask the members to ask questions?
It's Bob here. I'm happy to wait and see what questions come up.
Okay, thank you very much. And Graham, obviously by your silence, I think you must be quite happy to wait as well, are you? Yeah, we'll go with that. Okay, members' questions. Can I again go in alphabetical order? And therefore, Rachel, do you have any questions or points you wish to raise?
I do, thank you. Yeah, it's just one overall point. Thanks very much for the report. I understand, you'll come back to us at a later date on the impact on the accounts of COVID-19, but could you tell us a bit more about the impact of it on your ability to actually carry out the audit? and get appropriate audit evidence. So I'm thinking about, your ability as auditors to do things like verifying assets exist, reviewing documents that you'd normally do in a period of lockdown when you might not actually be visiting council offices. Also, any difficulties there might be in actually valuing some of the property at the balance sheet date. So, were valuers actually able to inspect buildings if they needed to in order to be able to value properties? So, could you just tell us a bit more about how you're dealing with those challenges, and whether there's actually any chance that there are areas you won't actually be able to give an opinion on because of it?
Thank you. Really good question, and something that we have been working on, obviously, for a number of weeks. We've actually had a dry run although the NHS would hate us to say that, because we're obviously in the middle of doing our audit work for NHS bodies currently. What we have learnt over the last 6 weeks is that it does take a bit longer to carry out the audit work remotely, both for us and for staff working in the council or the audited body as well, just because it's not as easy to gather the information and put it into one place and then send it. However, we are set up for remote working. We have the Canvas portal. So our electronic working paper system also has a mechanism through which officers can upload documentation. So it's safe, it's secure, it's protected. And we have relied on that increasingly over the last couple of years. This year's sort of pushing more and more councils and audited bodies to use that. So that all works. The challenges that we have are exactly the ones that you talked about. Firstly, property, plant and equipment existence is more challenging. Some of it's straightforward. So verifying the existence of a school is not necessarily the most difficult thing in the world. Verifying a photocopier that might be hidden in a building somewhere is a bit more challenging. There are mechanisms. That's where we use video technology, time and date stamps to try and do that. I am not aware that we are going to be issuing any limitations of scope over property, plant and equipment existence for NHS bodies, although potentially that could be an issue. The more challenging thing that we've had in the NHS, but thankfully is not an issue for local government, is stock, because it's not material. That has proved more of a challenge. In terms of valuations, we will wait to see what the valuation reports say. But largely, RICS have already issued guidance to say that they would expect valuers to be reflecting on material uncertainty. And therefore, it is likely that that will, if there is a reference to that in the valuation report, we will be carrying out more work and using our valuation experts. As I said, assets that are valued on depreciated replacement cost are less likely to be a challenge because obviously there is no market value, so it's more specialist. Those assets that are valued at fair value is where we will need more support from our side, which is partly why we flag there could be changes to fees as a consequence. I think I've covered all of the points. If there's something I've missed, please tell me.
No, that's good. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. Angus, do you have any questions or?
Thank you, Chairman. 2 points. One is a very, very petty one on page 109. The table there, I presume the final fee column should be 2018-2019, not 2018-2018. But that, so it's a petty point.
Yes, sorry.
The other one is, Helen, you said you were discussing with Deloitte. Would you hope that we won't have the same problems this coming year that we've had in previous year?
I always have hope. Our initial conversation did not fill me with confidence, if I am absolutely honest. And I did mention that to Bob in one of our catch-ups. And I know that the Berkshire Treasurers Group has been quite active in talking about this as well. The reason why we're having a second conversation this week is the first conversation was just at the start of COVID-19, and therefore none of us knew what was going to happen next. We obviously now have some more clarity. I think there is a challenge within that team about understanding when we're requesting assurances, and the mechanism through which we request assurances is set up actually by PSAA. So it originated within the Audit Commission, and the whole idea was that the pension fund auditor, to provide efficiency and to kind of reduce the costs and impact on the pension fund, would carry out work on behalf of all of the other audit firms. Unfortunately, it would appear that last year the Deloitte team working in Berkshire were not necessarily familiar with that approach, and so they just effectively ignored our request and reported back on the work that they had done, but they didn't do any additional work. So that's it's a dialogue that we're having with them to try and ensure that they are familiar with what is required from the Audit Commission, or what was required from the Audit Commission, now PSAA, and that then gives us that. So as I said, I have hope, but I would not want to I can't promise that we're not going to have some issues. And potentially, obviously, the part of the problem last year was that they had too complex investments. If they were complex last year, I rather suspect they may be complex this year.
Thank you for that. Just the thought, Graham, that I assume all this gets relayed to our representative on the pension fund, so they're fully able to stir things in their way.
Yeah, to be fair, Angus, we've tried to deal with it at the officer level, but you make a good point, and in trying to get the higher level of assurance that we need, that's certainly an avenue I'll take forward.
Thank you, Angus. Daniel Sargent, do you have any questions or comments?
No, it seems clear and reasonable to me. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Whoops, sorry, thank you. Imogen, do you have any comments or questions?
Hi there. Yeah, I mean, I'm just wondering, is there anything we could do to stop us being held to ransom by the pension fund team this coming year, or is it just going to happen again?
If I answer first, we are doing our best to have dialogue fund team to ensure that we have a joint understanding of what they're going to provide and to try and head off the issues. As I said, I can't guarantee what will happen as a consequence of that, but I don't know if either Bob or Graham would want to comment, because I know there have been a number of conversations amongst the officer group as well.
I don't have anything more to add than my previous comments.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, Rachel. Sorry, Imogen.
I'm Imogen. Yeah.
yeah, sorry.
I'm married to a Rochelle. Is that's what confusing me?
Could well be.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm glad to see that the investment properties here are as a risk. I'm just kind of wanting to know if there's what more are you going to do to evaluate the risk on those? Am I making sense? Hopefully I am.
Yeah, no, you're making sense. Justine, do you want to pick this up? Because I know you did a similar piece of work elsewhere last year. So it's to get assurance over the work that you will have already done over those investments. But Justine, anything you would like to add?
Well, we'll be testing the valuation of those investments as part of our work on the financial statements. In terms of our work on the value for money opinion, as I said, it's around the processes and procedures in place for the purchase of those properties. So it's the procedures prior to the purchase, which we're particularly interested in terms of governance, decision making, due diligence, and making sure you have the right and appropriate systems in place. So just to mitigate the risk and risk of errors.
That's good, because that's one of the things I'm interested in too. Okay, no worries, I'm done.
Thank you very much.
Chairman, sorry,
yes, Graham.
Chairman, it's Graham here. Just to add something as a modicum of assurance, this of course has been an area that's gone to overview and scrutiny, whereby many of these things have been questioned in that domain.
Thank you very much. Bob, you said you would like to listen to the questions before perhaps coming back. Do you have anything further you wish to mention?
Not particularly, other than echoing Graham's comments about the governance going around the investment properties. And it's important to remember that it's very easy to look back at them in hindsight and not with foresight when we actually made the decisions, although the decisions actually, I think at the time, were the correct decisions.
If I may, Chairman.
Yes.
So just to provide some assurance to the committee, we are not looking at this because we think there is a problem or that we're expecting to find a problem. We are looking at this to get assurance that you have the appropriate procedures in place. Bob has made a very fair point that obviously the point at which decisions would have been taken and transactions entered into, none of us would have known that there was the impact, there'd be such a significant impact from what started off looking like a flu epidemic in China, and obviously has had much more wide-ranging impacts than that. I think what we certainly are not setting out to criticise or look for a problem in those decisions, but it's sort of, did you take into account all the reasonable factors that could have been considered as part of that, and what processes might you now have in place to ensure that you are effectively protecting the investments that you've made. I hope that clarifies. I just didn't want anybody to feel that we are looking at this because we think there is a problem per se. We are looking at it because obviously it's a significant investment that you've made.
And I would like to add from a CFO perspective that of course councils like ourselves will need to embark on such enhanced levels of risk and commercialisation going forward, and any advice, findings, best practices, tightening of what we do would be greatly appreciated and adopted.
Thank you very much. If there's no further questions, I would ask you to note the report, and I would ask you to vote on that we'll go around again in alphabetical order. So, Rachel, are you happy to note the report? Yes. Thank you very much. Angus?
Noted.
Thank you. Daniel? And Imogen?
Noted.
Thank you very much. All noted. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the report to both Helen and Justine, and thank you for your comments. Very much appreciated.
Thank you.
We move on to item 74, which is update on changes on accounting policies. Could I ask Bob to present the report, please?
Yes, certainly. Good evening again. This is a standard report that we tend to bring at this time of year, every year, to the committee. It's good practice that the committee is aware of what accounting policies we follow when we compile the statement of accounts. And obviously, EY put a big tick in the box if we present it to yourselves before the actual statement of accounts are presented. So that's part of the reason why we do it. This year, there's been no significant changes at all to the accounting policies, other than as we do it, when we look at each year, we spot typographical mistakes, grammatical mistakes, and the occasional duplication of policies. We have taken out a policy that's no longer pertinent because it's immaterial. But other than that, nothing much has changed. We were expecting a whole new change of policy around IFRS 16, that because of the COVID-19 pandemic and the level of work going on has been deferred for another year, but it gives us more time to prepare for it when it comes in. That's around leases, so it's a fairly major piece of work. So what we've done so far today, it's not been lost, and it will help us inform the decision when it does come in the next financial year. As Helen mentioned earlier on her audit letter or audit plan, we now have more time available to us as the accountants to produce the statement of accounts. We have taken advantage of that by actually giving ourselves an extra month to the end of June, which actually is where it used to be only 2 years ago. So there's not been much back from the government on it, but we're taking advantage of it. and we still aim to complete our audit by the end of July, hopefully with the auditors, and a bit of tidying up in August, ready for the accounts to be signed off at the September Audit Committee, which is, I think, an ambitious target given the level of workload we've got, but it does certainly is achievable, I think, with the team. In summary on the report, Appendix A, for those that want to have trouble sleeping tonight, gives us all our accounting policies we use. These are reproduced later in the statement of accounts as well as part of the accounts. Appendix B summarises the changes that we have made to those accounting policies from those published in the last statement of accounts. And I hope you take any questions if you have any.
Thank you very much, Bob. Okay, we'll start with Imogen. Do you have any questions?
No, I do not, I think.
No?
Thank you.
Okay. Daniel Sargent.
No questions.
Thank you very much. Angus?
No
Sorry,
questions.
Angus. No,
Yes.
no, okay.
Questions.
Rachel?
No, nothing from me on that one, thanks.
Thank you very much. So there's no questions. So I would ask members again to note the report and vote on it accordingly. So I'll start with Rachel.
Yes.
Yes. Angus?
Noted.
Daniel? Imogen? Yes, that's all agreed. Thank you very much and all noted. Thank you, Bob. Thanks very much for that. Okay, so we move on to item 75, the Corporate Risk Register. This is going to be presented by Andrew, Graham and Susan. I don't know who wishes to speak first. I will leave it to the three of you to decide.
Okay, so shall I start? It's Susan here. So if I can start, thank you. So in terms of the report that you've got in front of you tonight, then obviously this is about the risk register, and I think the main point for us that we want to make is the fact that the COVID-19 has had a massive impact and materially changed, our sort of risk environment. And that we've got a broad 14 risks in the risk register, and we've made some very broad comments in the light of COVID-19. However, this is an ever-changing environment in terms of what we're actually facing and responding to. And what we wanted to say as CLT and in response to when you'll get a fuller update on the risk register is that we look to provide something, a much fuller response in July. So if you were to go through the risk register, I won't go through every item, but there are comments that have been made by CLT members about the views on the impact right now. So obviously the first one talks about financial management, and if you have any questions about that, then Graham can answer that, and then we move on to the corporate governance side of things, and then the workforce, and each of these risks. There is a lot of change in regards to each of the risks. So the workforce, as well in particular, there are many changes. So are there any? I wasn't proposing to go through each of the actions. Are there any questions or comments to myself or Graham?
Sorry, Chairman, could I just
Yes.
say one or two accompanying words to Susan's is we really take the risks of the organisation very seriously, and particularly now in the light of COVID. And the fact that Susan, as the Chief Executive, and myself in the capacity of Deputy Chief Executive are here tonight is really, I guess, a mark that we take this issue very seriously and wanted to talk to you directly about it. What I would say is, in addition to this risk register, which, as Susan said, we've only taken a fairly light touch in updating, because we know there's a fundamental rewrite that's going on, directed and orchestrated by Andrew Morton with our departmental management teams, and that's going on over the next 2 or 3 weeks. So we're going to have a complete rewrite in the context of the impact of COVID and looking ahead. But also we run an emergency planning arrangement around the whole of the COVID crisis, which it involves looking at all the risks as they come through in the context of the crisis, and then looking at risks regarding recovery. And that applies not just to finances, but everything across the council.
Thank you very much. Are there any other comments you wish to make before I ask the members to ask their questions? If not, we will go around each member again in alphabetical order. So start with Rachel. Do you have any questions at all?
I do have quite a few questions on this. I've got a sort of overall comment, but also questions on quite a few of the risks. So I don't know if you want me to go through all of my points, or might it be worth, Chair, taking each risk in turn and seeing if members have comments?
Oh, sorry, I just muted myself. If you'd like to give your first comment, and then we'll see if they would like to answer that one. Okay, so do the first one.
First, with an overall comment, thank you for the report, and thank you to both Susan and Graham for attending this evening. So overall, I understand that the risk of a pandemic is listed on the government's risk register. I'm interested to know why it hasn't been listed on previous versions that we have seen of this register. And in addition, and probably more importantly, how does our risk management process really address the risk of the second wave of the virus? For example, are we building up stocks of PPE? Are we making sure we've got the right supply chains? How are health and safety staff learning from what's happened to prepare for a possible second wave? If the lockdown is strengthened, not eased, how do we continue our essential functions? All of that. And I know this is a work in progress. I do understand that, but I'd be interested in your comments about how our processes are really addressing that risk of a second wave.
Oops, thank you very much, Rachel. I don't know who wants to answer it. I think Susan would like to. Yes.
Yeah. So if in terms of so right now we are in the midst of responding to the crisis, and as Graham has said, we have a daily emergency response daily meeting, which includes which has a risk register and or actually discusses our risks. And very recently, our focus has been on the care, responding in terms of our sort of care plan for our care homes to government. And in the next month, we will be responding to the having a local outbreak control plan in place. So we're right in the midst of responding to the crisis. In terms of PPE, our focus is on actually having a real strength of supply for PPE for ourselves, for the schools, for our care homes, and ensuring that that is in place. At the same time, the government are introducing a clipper system, which will ensure that our PPE supplies will be more certain in the future. So I suppose what I would say is all the steps that we're putting in place will mean that we have the strong building blocks should there be a second wave of the pandemic.
And Chairman, if I could come in addition.
Yeah, please do.
Because if I understood the question rightly, there was also the issue of should it have been on our corporate risk register before COVID arose. And I think it's always a fair point, especially in the midst or after the crisis. But I suppose our risk management, it takes the matrix of likelihood and impact, and it's always in that context that we undertake our work. And I would say, although a pandemic is not wholly unlikely, because we know there was SARS and there was something before SARS, but I think it's fair to say that no previous pandemic, certainly in my lifetime anyway, has had the impact economically and across the council's functions and the community's welfare in the way that COVID has. So I think, you know, we live in a world where we just can't fully prepare for every conceivable risks, and therefore we have to take a balanced likelihood impact approach, and therefore that wouldn't have been on the radar. In terms of again, I guess we need to take a similar approach to a second wave, which of course is indeed a possibility. However, that has to be undertaken in a conscientious way, recognizing that if we stockpiled various things like PPE, then that could be at great cost to the organisation and may not be used. So I think it's like keeping a close ongoing review, which is obviously what we'll do through the crisis until we come out the other end.
Thank you very much.
And I'd like,
yes,
I'd like to reiterate that it's the building blocks that we're putting in place will mean that we are resilient and able to respond to a second wave should it occur.
Thank you very much. Rachel, do you have another question, did you say?
I do have quite a few questions. So
okay, well, can I take the next one and then we'll ask Angus and then we'll come back. Take the next question then.
Okay, thank you. So that was on the first risk on budgeting, financial management, etc. I'm interested to know what sort of financial scenario planning has been done relating to a bit longer term, so the next sort of 3 years. You know, do we have sort of different scenarios, you know, depending on what happens from here on in? Sort of best case, worst case, etc. And do we therefore know the sort of level of any mitigating actions we might have to take in each of those scenarios? So basically, do we know the scale of the financial risk due to the COVID situation in the longer term?
Thank you. Who would like to come back on that? Yeah, thank you very much, Ryan.
Okay. Yeah, that's a really tough question. I guess the reason why it's so tough is that there's an infinite set of movable objects here, flexibilities and unknowns. So, for example, the local government finance settlement is in the near term to medium term. The ability to raise our council tax and what levels we can manage to do that. The ability for us to respond in any moment around, for example, an emergency budget measures and of course we're setting budgets year on year. So I guess all we can reasonably do is forecast to the best of our ability, and at the moment it's about looking at all the planning assumptions that are in place around the easing of lockdown and what that might do in terms of the releasing of leisure income and the like. So I guess sorry, I'm struggling with this question because there's just such a world of unknowns and improbables and possibilities that one could drive themselves mad in terms of all the different scenarios. So I guess what my stance is as a CFO is ensure we have robust balances, ensure we keep an eye on those balances, ensure we have contingency plans and intervention measures in place. Some of those may be stopping things, some of those may be resetting things, some may be creating new budget targets, some will be around generating extra income from lobbying representations to the government. I guess it's knowing all of the options at our disposal to respond, and I know we have many, and therefore I don't see us ever just moving to a doomsday scenario, because my job is always to not only have options available but be able to give direction with our corporate leadership team to respond to what presents itself to us. So
yeah, I do understand that, there's obviously lots of different possibilities. I totally understand that. I think for me, it's more a case of thinking about, well, what's the worst case? If all those, the worst case scenarios in each of those options did happen, what would that mean? And therefore, how have we planned enough for that outcome? If we carry on saying, well, it'll probably be sort of, it won't be the worst case, there won't be the doomsday scenario. We might not necessarily assess the full level of the risk that we face. I mean, none of us expected this pandemic to happen. So, we can't be in any way obviously complacent about what might happen in the future.
Yeah, I completely agree. What I would say, and I want this to be taken into context, many local authorities up and down the country, faced with that question, would be saying, well, we're thinking about issuing what's called a 114 notice, which is we are going towards financial insolvency, and it's where the Chief Finance Officer puts that statement to council saying we're heading for financial unviability. Our balances are running down to zero. We have no plans to get out of this. This crisis is huge, and it's had a massive financial impact across local authorities up and down the country. What I would say is I am reasonably as sure as I can be right now that we are not moving in that direction. But if we took every scenario and turned it into worst case, then the maths would say, without a doubt, any authority put in a worst case scenario on this would I think it's improbable that any would say, oh, we're fine. So what I'm really conveying to you is a worst case scenario means we're broke, but I'm saying I would ensure that I act responsibly as the CFO and advise and recommend and work with my corporate leadership team, Susan, of course, as the Chief Executive, to make sure we introduced all the possible measures to prevent that happening. And I think that's the only practical, realistic answer I can give, because a mathematical answer is that we would be bust if it all went the wrong way and nothing came back our way. But we would stop that happening by having to cut our cloth and work within our means.
Thank you very much, Graham. Rachel, we'll come back to you at the end. I'll ask Angus now if he has any questions. Hello, Angus.
Yeah, thank you. It takes a bit of time for my microphone to come on.
Right.
One comment, one question. On item 13, the climate emergency, I'm reassured after making comments last year that we're far clearer in talking about preparation for droughts, which we're close to at the moment, or bad winters. So that's just a comment. But the question is on item 4, in reference to the local plan and planning. We mentioned about the concern because of the 5-year land supply. We don't mention the fact that we don't have what some people are considering to be a current local plan. I just felt that that should be specifically referred to.
Yes, Susan, I understand you would like to come back.
That's noted, Angus.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Move on. Daniel, do you have any questions?
Yeah, no questions as such. I just wanted to take a minute to comment and to endorse the approach really the officers have taken on this exercise. So I think, you know, for an audit committee to sat here in June, the pandemic playing out how it is, I think it would be unreasonable for us to expect a wholesale shift in the risk register. But I'm heartened that actually that work's going on in the background, because I think this has changed a lot of what we do to such a significant degree that I think it's worthwhile, and I look forward to seeing it in July. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Imogen.
Hi there. I mean, let me find my microphone. Yeah, that works. The one thing I'm looking through on this risk register, there's the one thing that the elephant in the room to me that is missing is obviously, as everybody's working from home and everything like this, you're very heavily dependent on your IT infrastructure being good, and I just don't see it mentioned here. You know, what do you do if everyone VPNs into shoot end? What do you do if that packs up? If Office 365 is been known to have meltdowns and things like this, and the impact on your business would be quite significant. And I see comments about data protection here, but not really about ensuring that the IT infrastructure that runs the business of Woking Borough Council is being supported and funded and kept sound. Obviously, we're using technology now for virtual meetings. Up until a couple of months ago, we weren't really using it, and I think that is heavily missing from this. As a business from this risk register. Anyone want to answer that one?
Yeah,
Yes, Susan.
I can answer that. I think we need to include it, I think, is the answer.
Yes.
So it's a really helpful feedback in terms of, you know, to ensure that we've got that in our in the risk register when it comes back. So thank you for that.
Okay. Looking at that, I mean, I understand this. I understand Rachel's comments on the budget forecasting. You can't forecast for everything, but I do feel that it didn't react quick enough to a major crisis. You know, it could be 9/11, it could be shoot end burning down. You could ask Bob about that, and or something, you know, along those lines. That, you know, whatever the crisis is, there needs to be some way of, oh, we got this big crisis coming. What is the process of how we deal with that? Or which would, oh gosh, am I making sense? I don't know. But I don't know.
Yeah, it makes sense to me, Imogen, and I would like to answer it.
Sure, go right ahead.
Sorry, there's a lot of echo. I apologise.
Who's not muted? Bill, you've not muted.
Yeah, I'm not muted. I will.
Thank you.
Yes, I understand what you're saying. Right, my answer to that would be our emergency planning response. So we have an emergency planning governance in the organisation. We have an emergency planning officer called Brett Dyson, who might have been to your committee, yeah, and he helps us with the best practice of preparedness for major events, whether that's
he did COVID-19.
Yeah, yes. So whether that was loss of accommodation, loss of IT, or loss of staff for a large period of time, what I would say, and I think everyone would agree with me, those involved, is that the response, the immediate response to this, starting with the, because we were one of the first cases in the country with the teaching.
We were the first.
Yeah, we were the first. Well, we had actually met prior to that, knowing that, and we had, and then we immediately over the weekend kicked into place the emergency planning procedures. So all of our services had up-to-date service planning templates which planned for loss of accommodation, loss of IT, loss of people. And those served us really well. Without doubt, the impact of this wasn't known, the enormity of it, no question, but our ready to respond to an emergency was, I think we were really well prepared, and it stood us in good stead to get off the blocks really quickly and just immediately moved into what felt like a well-oiled machinery. Now, that well-oiled machinery didn't deal with everything and take all the problems away, but I think it helped us feel that we were well organised and on towards the front foot as far as we could be.
Can I ask if there will be like a lessons learned on, or anything that from we're coming out of this a bit now, but will there be a review of how the council reacted, etc., and feeding it back into the process?
Shall I come back on that?
Sure.
Yeah, okay. So in terms of our response and lessons learned, then we will be taking our response through to the ONS, and so there'll be a report to the ONS Management Committee, and then the committee will need to decide how to examine and review different aspects of our response. So I think that will be the process by which that examination will take place.
Okay. My question on the workforce one is, at what level, if people started getting sick, at what level do we run into other kinds of problems? Looking at number 3 on the list. So, you know, if people are getting sick or not able to work or whatever it is, I don't see that being mentioned here as, you know, how many staff can you lose before you stop functioning, and what becomes your priorities then?
Can I say? I'm sorry, Susan, you go first.
No, go on. It's okay, Graham. You go.
What I was going to say is, under that risk management scenario planning, we planned for an epidemic in terms of a pandemic. I mean, and we put planning assumptions in. I'd need to check, but I think we planned for loss of 25% staff for a 6-month period, and all the managers did the work around that to keep the key services going and prioritise within their service areas. I would need to check, but I think it was something like that, if not higher, in terms of the assumption, the planning assumptions for loss, not the actual expectation. And those assumptions were informed by the likes of Brett, who links with all the other emergency planning officers around the country, and that was considered to be a good worst case scenario to be planning for.
Okay. With the climate emergency one, that just seems to have been put on hold, and it seemed to be a decision of one person to put it on hold. I'm just wondering how important was it if one person gets to make the decision to put it on hold? And how, I mean, we're kind of missing a trick here almost, because everybody's staying at home or working at home. Are we doing any assessments of things as to what effect it's having on our roads? You know, are people cycling more and all this sort of thing, and encouraging people to continue these things that they've learned, having a lower carbon footprint in their life? You know, what is the council doing to capitalise on what's happening at the moment and how people are having to live? Am I making any sense?
Yes, that makes complete sense to me, Imogen.
Good, thank you.
I chair the cross-party officer group on this, and I'm also present on an external advisory body. I'm not disputing the whole thing, but I don't know where it comes from. But from my perspective, nothing's been on hold. We've had climate emergency meetings, same frequency, and we've also had a Teams call with the external advisory group that's part of the governance. They're there as specialists to sense check our work, give us ideas, give us connections. I know various strands of work are progressing. The bank, for example, I know I've seen emails regularly about that. I know one about road surfacing, whether we can get a spray down there that absorbs carbon. I know work has gone on that. And I have been engaged with the lead member for climate emergency as regularly as I have many of the other lead members I work with. And indeed, we've gone through our assessments of some proposed bids in order to see whether further investment to generate a greater carbon reduction, whether they can be taken forward. So a whole host of work's gone on. Also, that whole point that you raise of not just us changing the way we work to reduce our, so can we work more digitally, remotely, get the cars off the roads, etc. But we know this is a vital time to connect with businesses and have conversations or let's say some communications around, well, this is serving you well, isn't it? It's working. So all these things that's working well in a remote world whereby you don't have to get on a plane and travel to the other end of the continent in order to have a conversation, then fly back. You can do that through taking advantage of the new digital world, which is incredibly more resilient, operational and functional than we probably imagined. So we know now is the time to get in touch with businesses and have those types of conversations, and that's very much on the work plan. Furthermore, the Climate Emergency Action Plan is being developed, and we had an overview and scrutiny on climate emergency only last week, which helped with the formulation of the plan, and that is heading towards council on its due date.
Thank you very much. Can I, at this point, go back to Rachel, because I know she had a number of points that she wanted to raise. So, Rachel, do you have any points you want to bring back?
Thank you. Yeah, thanks very much. So the first point was just a comment really on the wording of some of it. So on risk 2, which is the corporate governance risk. So the document states that there were clear governance arrangements for managing COVID, but I mean, arguably there was actually very little oversight or governance at the member level for a period of time. The regular virtual meetings are obviously just starting again now, but this took quite a long time to get going after the legislation was changed. The document does mention engagement with the political leader, and I know there are regular leader briefings, but it's made very clear that those are just that. They're briefings. They're not any kind of opportunity for debate, and they are confidential, and they're essentially sort of one-way briefings with no officer support. So that isn't, to me, sort of clear governance from members. I totally understand, obviously, that the officers are, extremely busy, and this is unprecedented, and we all appreciate the work that they're doing. But I just think that the document is slightly misleading there if it's suggesting that clear governance at the member level was maintained. In terms of other comments, I would echo the comments earlier about the local plan. So that's risk number 4. I don't think at the moment that it addresses really the severity of that risk. So the previous local plan was dependent on a new town at Graiseley, which in turn was dependent on government funding for infrastructure, a scheme which has now ended. There's obviously also the extension of the danger zone around the AWE, which has a big impact, yet the document itself still mentions the consultation on the draft local plan in January as if that was an existing control. So I think we need to be clearer on that point, that the material delay there. in terms of a question on risk number 6, which is the safeguarding risk, we're noting and identifying the risks that are caused by COVID here. So, but there doesn't seem to be enough in further actions to actually address them. So we're recognising that there's increased instances of mental health problems. We're recognising that increase in domestic abuse, etc., etc. So sort of identifying the issues, but there's nothing to tell us what the council is doing to address those. So we can't, as a committee, really get any assurance on that at the moment, that those risks are being managed until that's updated. Is that something that will be updated in the next draft?
Shall I come back on that? So I guess when I opened up the conversation about the report, I said that it was they were very broad comments, because we are in the midst of dealing with the crisis, and we don't know all of the answers to the issues that we're facing. So so there will be more information, and as I said right at the start, in the July risk register that will come to the committee.
Okay, thank you for that. I just got 2 more comments. One on the Brexit risk. The action there, the mitigating action, says that overview and scrutiny are monitoring that. I don't believe that it's actually on the forward plan for corporate community overview and scrutiny at the moment, or the main management overview and scrutiny. I know that everyone's been preoccupied with COVID, but I also know that, for example, June is a key month for Brexit, and we just do need to be making sure that it is on the forward programmes for those committees. And then my last point is on the climate emergency risk, which others have also commented on. So this is page 159 of the pack. Now I really take issue with the wording on this one. It states that there's regular monitoring of targets. Again, I think that's misleading wording. If the climate emergency objective is to become carbon neutral in the borough, we need carbon reduction targets, not just actions, but actual carbon reduction targets. And those are not in place at the moment. So there may be actions, but there are no proper carbon targets. Here we are sort of 1 year on from when this was agreed on. And this document, I think, sort of suggests that everything's going really well. So I would just like it on record that I think that's quite misleading.
Susan, did you want to? I think you indicated you were going to come back in.
Did I? Sorry, mate. That was. Oh
right.
No, I think maybe Graham might be more appropriate to come back in terms of that point about the crime reduction target that Rachel's been made.
Okay, Graham.
The target was. So was it about the climate emergency one? Because I thought I heard crime reduction.
Yeah. Sorry, I said carbon reduction?
Oh, carbon reduction. Okay. Yeah. First of all, on just a little bit of assurance on following on from what Susan said about, well, the risk measures, those things that are identified as risks as a result of COVID, the fact that they're named there is a form of assurance. It means we know that these are risks, and therefore we're getting onto them to make sure that they're managed in the best way that they can be. As for going on to the specific on climate, well, there was the issue of scrutiny, which I understand. There's different ways of considering what scrutiny or oversight is. And I would say that we tried to be, in the context we're in a crisis, we tried to be as transparent as we could be by involving all parties in regular briefings and briefing the ruling party on a very regular basis. So my engagement, and I suspect Susan's, with members during COVID has been as heightened, if not more heightened than previously. So I understand that's not formal committees and what have you, but it still provides challenge, steer, and issues to be raised that need to be looked at and addressed. So I think it was very functional and practical and pragmatic, albeit it didn't adhere to the usual constitutional public meetings. As for climate emergency, I apologise if that is misleading. I can't remember exactly how the words were created, but what I will say is it's a fair point. It has taken us some time to get the carbon reduction targets in place, and that's what this next iteration is intended to do. And that's exactly what we said when we first reported the plan to council, is that a following plan would come back with proper carbon reduction measures in place. I will say we're not the only authority that's struggling with this. Even baselining carbon footprint was initially quite a task, not for us, just for us, but for other local authorities. And then to have properly costed and assessed carbon reduction measures against all the various targets is a pretty significant piece of work, especially when one considers the number of actions that we're looking to formulate. But I apologise if the wording was misleading.
Thank you very much, Graham. Okay. If there's no other comments anybody wishes to make, can we move on then to for the committee to agree the recommendations within the report? And I will go through in an alphabetical form, asking Rachel first of all. Are you happy to agree?
I'd like to abstain on this.
You'd like to abstain. Thank you. And Angus?
Agreed, and look forward to the update in July.
Thank you very much. Daniel?
Agreed.
Thank you. Imogen?
I think I might abstain because it just needs so much work.
Okay, thank you. And I will agree. Thank you very much. So I think I'm right in saying that was carried, if my maths is right. Thank you very much. Okay, we move on to the forward programme, item 76 on the agenda. Do the officers have any changes they want to make to the forward programme? Ask the officers first. I'm looking at a blank screen, so I will assume there are no changes. Can I go around each member and ask again if there's any changes or if they wish to speak on the forward programme? I'm supposed to do this in reverse order, so we'll start with Imogen. Anything you wish to?
I think there should be more on this list, but I'm not exactly sure what.
I'll come back to you in a moment. Have a think about it. Okay. For that reason, then I will go to Daniel.
No, that's fine. Thank you.
You're okay. Angus?
No questions at this time.
Okay. And Rachel?
Nothing from me.
Okay. Come back to you, Imogen. Is there anything that you wish to add?
I just wondering if we should look at the property investment valuations separately, but that could be just me.
Oh, sorry, muting myself. How does everybody feel about that one being added? Everybody happy or have any comments?
I think that may well be covered in the audit reports.
Yeah, sorry, Chairman.
It will be buried deep, but yes.
Okay.
It's Helen.
All right. Yes. Hello.
I think actually, although we added it when we updated the audit programme, I think our audit results report has fallen off the meeting of the 23rd of September. So that has the statement of accounts.
Right.
But that would also have our audit results report. So it would be our commentary on that. Obviously, I think the statement of accounts has possibly November in brackets next to it. That would be the backstop if things don't go right, and that would be the same for ours. But the audit results report has fallen off altogether.
Okay. So that needs to be included.
Yes, please, on the in the same way that item 2 in September is.
Yes. Okay. If Madeline can note, thank you very much. Okay, if there's no other changes and no other comments, I think we've gone through the meeting. So can I thank everybody, Helen and Justine, and all members of the committee and officers for their inclusion in this meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.
Thank you for stepping in as chairman.
Thank you. Yes. Yes.